Well, here I'm working on the car deck, trying to get the bow of this ferry to look like it's somewhat in the shade and to get some of the textures um, from all the cars running off to the end of it. And then there's a safety net that's put up and strung across the bow every time that you launch, and then it's taken down, and it's supported by these bars that fit into these holes in the deck, and it stretches from side to side. And this is the perspective of the piece, looking from the front of the second deck. It's kind of an observation area, and you can look down on the car deck. And what I've done here is used the masking fluid to very carefully draw out this net. And it was slow, and it had to be done with care, because if you spill a bunch of that fluid on there, you just have to let it dry and wipe it off and start all over again. So in order to get some fine lines with the thing, I used a paper clip, and I just every stroke of it, probably the farthest you can go is maybe an inch, because the masking fluid doesn't want to flow off of the end of a paper clip, or anything else for that matter. It's a little tricky to use, but you get the hang of it with a little experimentation. So this safety net is partly in the shade, and it's partly in the light. The upper part of it is being struck by the light. But what I'm doing right here is actually trying to make the car deck look continuous behind it. And so kind of putting down a gray. And even though the masking fluid is green, it's going to work, because I'm not paying attention to that greenish gray color. I'm doing a continuation of the gray that's already down on the deck. And for that I used some Prussian, a little bit of Payne's gray, a touch of black to tone it all down so it wasn't too vibrant. And then there's a little bit of alizarin crimson touched in there to get it toward the purple. And that I use alizarin crimson a lot for that kind of a shadowy purple. You can use cad red or rose or whatever, but sometimes it becomes a little too strong, and the purple is a little bit overwhelming. And to put it into the shade, it seems to work best if you add a touch of black with it, alizarin crimson, and like Prussian or Payne's gray. Prussian works real well, indigo, and they make kind of a cool, deep, grayish purple color that seems to recede very well and makes good shadows. So getting that car deck color down first, and then there'll be some highlights on this netting, which happens primarily when I take the masking fluid off. Right now it's just going between all of the lines, and so you get a little bit of a checkerboard appearance. And then when I dry all of this color that I'm using on the decking, I will then I'll add some highlights to the netting itself, and even a little touch of white here and there to kind of really bring out some sun hitting the top of the rope, because that is some kind of nylon net. And so it's just I'm working from the ground up, because you can see through this net to a degree, and I want to get the base color in there. Also, that net, it casts a bit of a shadow itself, which is going to become apparent, and I'm going to have to deal with that. Some areas it's very against the far side of the boat there, that that little wall, stem wall that goes kind of, it goes all the way up to, kind of arches up to the second deck. That's kind of a light gray, and it's going to have a very distinct shadow on it. And then I've got to work around the figures, so I put some masking on them in a couple of little places, just on the head of the one figure and a little bit on the bike, because I don't want to lose some of those light areas. And I was concerned that if I hadn't used masking fluid, I just have to be too careful with putting down my wash colors. And so I'm doing kind of it's not a all-out full wash, because the paper is damp, but not so damp that everything's going to flow together. And so it's kind of a dry brush approach here, using the side of the brush, and I like the fact that it creates some textures. So that's my method for working beneath the figures. And there's also a little strip where there's a kind of like a caution thing that's put on the deck that I have to paint, and it's kind of got that caution yellow. And in addition to that, it's a kind of a yellow black check looking thing. It just is a cautionary bit of graphic that's put down on the deck itself to keep people from going beyond that spot. And we've all seen it, and we just kind of take it for granted, but I got to paint that on there too. And then painting around these figures and then getting all the details of these bikes, I've worked myself into a part of the painting where I'm just getting down to the like number 2 liner brush, and really getting my nose up in there and getting close to it. No more washes, except maybe somewhat on their clothing, but of course when I work on the faces, I just have to go very slow and be very careful. And what I've done on the faces, by the way, is I used some Indian red, which worked very well with a little bit of raw sienna and a little bit of sepia, and I play around with that mixture, because what I found is if you try to do faces with adding white, what you end up with is a very pasty mask-like looking skin tone. And all of us have, beneath our skin, obviously a system that includes a lot of color. So we want that color, that vibrance of our skin that comes from within to kind of come to the surface, and you can't get it with, if you add white, it subdues it, and white tends to take the chroma away. It takes the strength of the colors away and flattens them out. Same thing with black. They do this similar things. I mean, one obviously works in shadow and one in highlight, but they have the same effect. They reduce the saturation and chroma, and kind of make colors less vibrant. And so I try not to do it on the faces, unless it's just to maybe touch it here and there, like the tip of the nose or the tiny bit on the brow, that kind of thing, just to indicate the lights and shadows. So I'm going to painstakingly apply some color to these figures, and as I work my way through here, I'm going to speed it up a bit and let you listen to some music rather than me prattle on. And I will get back and with some final comments at the end. But thanks so much for watching. Well, I've been working on some really detailed bicycle parts and clothes and the hair, and getting real close to my work here with a small brush, which I have to do because it's in the foreground. There's a lot of other things in this painting that are detailed, and so the closer objects are to the viewer, then the more distinct they're going to be. So I really know getting around it. I couldn't just kind of do ciphers for images, like a lot of watercolorists do, and I kind of enjoy that. But in this instance, to fit the style of this painting, I have to kind of get in tight and have to treat it as though it's its own painting. Just as, it's probably maybe 6 by 8 or even smaller area here that I'm concentrating on, and I know there'd be a lot of attention focused on it, probably because the colors are vivid, there are some dark accents, and there's some highlights, and wherever you have that, you're going to draw the eye. If the colors were more muted or not quite as high of contrast, then it would probably not engage the viewer quite as much. But I wanted it like this, and because I need a balance in this painting. There's so much going on with that ferry landing and all of its mechanical aspect. I needed something here to counterbalance all of that, and the colors in this painting are what I really enjoy, and I've repeated the color of her coat in other areas. It's actually seen somewhat in the water, and the bike, I changed the color of it and the color of the bike seat from what I had from my models pictures, and I wanted to make it more of a girl's bike, but not too dainty. It's still a touring type of bike, but it's got a little bit of retro to it, and bikes are tricky. You can't do every single spoke. You can't do every nut and bolt or support, and you have to decide what parts are you going to concentrate on. For example, with the wheels and the tires, I have to make up my mind. Am I going to really bring those super sharp into focus, or just convey the idea? And in this instance, I'm trying to just convey the idea, because when you start looking at these hubs, all of the gears, the chains, the metal supports, the racks, all of that sort of thing, there's just so much there that I don't want it to be overwhelming and confusing to people looking at this painting. So I have approached it more or less like, give enough detail that gives the eye something to relate to, so that our minds will grasp, okay, it's a bike wheel, and these are spokes, and these are sprockets, and there's all of this happening here, but we don't need necessarily to draw every one of them or paint every one of them. And it kind of feels like what I'm doing. I'm drawing with this little paintbrush, and it's not particularly wet either, because if you get too much water involved, then of course it's hard to control. Well, the hardest part of this probably is the car, this tarmac here, this part of the car decking, and making that continuous behind the figures.
some of it, I could have done an entire wash of it. Maybe I would have been smart. I did somewhat. I do a wash of the card decking first, and then just over the top of my drawing, and then I would still be able to see my drawing well enough where I could start with the figures. But then I thought, well, that's going to affect what I do with skin tones and colors of the bike, and I needed to highlight some of the areas on the wheels and tires, and I just didn't want too much pigment there to come into play. So a lot of it I had to go back through and kind of dry brush and kind of drag my brush through the background of it to make a continuous card decking that looks as though it's beneath and behind the figures, which I think it's working, but I'm probably going to do a little more with it. It might be a little dark in spots. I want my shadows here to be fairly dramatic, so I'm probably going to lighten up a little bit in some places, and then behind the figures, in the direction of the shadows, I'm going to make them a little bit darker. So I still have that work to do. Right now I'm working on the parka for this figure, who has one of these, it's one of those puffy style, if I may, parkas that where I've spent some time with my drawing to get that right. I don't know. I think it's going to work, but here I am noticing things now. What I intend to do here is actually to where these pencil lines are, I'm going to go over them with a black and a mixture of sepia, and go over these lines. And the back of the figures is going to be, well, as you can see from her, it's going to be fairly dark on his back, so that'll be just mostly a wash of black over the top of it. But first I'm going to do these lines and creases and so forth that are showing up in this parka, and if I just do the lines and let that dry set in for a little bit, and then come back and go over the top of it with a bit of a wash, it'll soften those lines, and it should be fairly effective in terms of creating the that volume that you have on those coats. It look like they're puffed up a little bit. So here I'm going to be working very close to the image. I had to do that with the faces, I had to get right down with, and it's the reason I didn't do a lot of filming there, because I had to get my nose right down here to see what I was working on. When I get back here a little, working on the boat, I'm going to be drawing back, and I have a little bit of touch up with some areas around the face and in the background here, but for the most part, aside from little details that catch my eye, this is pretty far along. I don't see a whole lot more that I'm concerned about. You run into that question, how far do you want to go? When are you finished? And I guess what the best method for me is to just get away from it for at least, overnight, and get a fresh look at it and see if there's anything that really disturbs your eye, that brings you back and goes, I don't really like that. And that happens to me frequently, where I can't see it after painting for 2 or 3 or 4 hours. I can't see the relationships between various aspects, elements of the painting, as well as when I get a fresh look at it on a new day. And I don't know if it's that way with everyone, but sure is with me. So I'm going to be playing with some of what I've done, and it's not going to be a broad brush. It's all now kind of detailed and right down to my signature. I'll probably be completing this within an hour or two, if I'm lucky, if I don't make any big goofs. So that's what I'm going to be doing, and I will get that on the road, and I'll try to illustrate that as I go along, and we'll see what's what. I'm going to probably, first of all, this is a bit tricky too, lighten up a little bit of what I've done with my drawing, because it's so easy to overdo. This is a great eraser, by the way. It's a Prismaco Magic Rub. These things are excellent. They'll deal with a multitude of sins, and they don't really hurt the paper, which is one big concern when you're using an eraser. You've got to be careful because this paper is so delicate. So this is all going to be darker than the front, so I don't have to really make that light at this point. So I'm going to be going for my darks, and kind of a liner brush so I can tread lightly, and I'll put in those they're actually stitched seams. They're not seams, but I don't know what you call it, where the material is gathered and they make those puffy things. And I'm going to work in the shadow first, because clearly that'll be the darkest part.